Tacoma, where I now live, which is about, a third of the way to Portland, Oregon from Seattle, south of Seattle, about an hour by bus. There's a lot of veterans here and that. Um, like, it's kind of place where people see their time in civilian clothes is undercover. They got the reason they is because they see journalists as snitch, spy stuff. They can't conceptualize journalism in any other real way. So they got to vie with it undercover military personnel. And if you look at the situation back in Pittsburgh, it's not really that much different. But if you look at the situation overall with the Green New Deal, there's people out here who came up with a lot of that. And now we're in a situation where uh, the good-hearted Joe Biden is dealing with the defection of a member of Congress who should have defended the Green New Deal, should have defended Democratic Party prerogatives through thick and thin, someone Joe Manchin. And that's what I want to talk to you about. I'm just placing the situation, so you can track me down and stuff. The culture where I come from in Pittsburgh is very similar to Tacoma in some ways. They want to make sure that they know where you live so they can fight about anything you say if they so choose. Well, see, the problem with Noam Chomsky's concept of the peasants with their pitchforks coming to make sure that the Green New Deal gets adopted is that Joe Manchin is that type of pitchfork leader. He gets a lot of support from the tri-state area where, frankly, their idea of ecology is a junkyard. So you have a pitchfork army whose concept of the brass is robber barons, the Pinkertons and the railroad strikes, um, the litany of abuses against unions. That's where these people came up from, and they still have a major regard for what they see as the self-made man who emerges from the pack on the waterfront, like Marlon Brando, which is obviously how Joe Manchin sees himself. But see, they're not really. I mean, they hold themselves spellbound with their uh, deceits, which they see as a product of the imagination that they own. Deceit is a plastic reality that they live to enthrall by and enforce. It's sort of the jugular vein of the philosophy of Hollywood, the Democratic Party that supported Reagan, not so secretly. But and the songs and dances that nobody believes about Vietnam and Iraq sold. They talk about China and its cells. Well, it's not that far removed from uh, the ecologist scene in West Virginia. The ecologist scene in West Virginia is a lot like Joe Manchin. They've been around a long time and they won't listen to anybody. That's the culture he came up from. They have a lot more in common than you might believe. And so there's grudging mutual, you know, uh, fraternal stuff that goes back and forth between them, and it might have even been this regard for I, thou from West Virginia that led the ecology camp of West Virginia to rule over, play dead, and be gratuitously reamed by Joe Manchin because they recognize themselves in him. Not that he's really a self made man. When I say that their deceits are all encompassing and they can really get lost in them, that doesn't mean they spend much time thinking honestly. Joe Manchin isn't a self-made man, but to actually go through the processes of whereby he's a poster boy for the new idea of the robber barons is largely futile because they won't check out a book like that from the public library. They just want to use the internets for porno. What you see though is, Joe Manchin as an image. Take a picture of him. It's perfect. He's the self-made man. So that's the situation in the tri-state and down West Virginia. I mean, obviously, if they pass laws saying what he's doing is ecocide, that he's going to be the poster boy for a new age of most wanted by the FBI. And he's not going to stand for that. He'll get out his pitchfork. That's why he poses with his 22 pistol rifle or whatever, and shoots the bottles from the rope. So people know he's the pitchfork kind of guy. Anyway, all that stuff is important to understand when you think about constructive progress towards the Green New Deal and what stands in the way. Because the man of the people mystique, the Jimmy Stewart, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, it's what Joe Manchin's representing as his rhetorical ploy for confounding what everybody knows is the best, most beautiful prospect for a future for our children. I could uh, taunt Manchin if I wanted to by saying, what's the difference between what he's doing and the dudes in Uvalde? You know, just take a look and watch. But I don't think Joe Manchin would have delayed in trying to rescue those kids. He's not conning, really. He's just sort of dumb. I think he probably believes that the danger is not as great as they're making it out to be. Well, Mr. Manchin, turns out that it is. I took a course out here in Tacoma where they offer climate change, and I have books here and the climatology that prove the case that its science is making as eloquently as the hell on earth that went through Spain and London. And, God help India. So, your ego trips, everybody recognizes for what they are. I don't think people recognize that Chomsky and Manchin are sort of a hit it off dynamic duo. And that's where my investigations really comes in because one of the leaders of the ecology movement in West Virginia is Tom Rod and his brother William Rod, who were party to the way I was tortured by Manson Cinema when I was a child. And they're cutthroat, they're killers. Todd Clark, who liaisons with Yoko Ono through the Warhol crowd. Lewin is in his family picture. What's the name of Sexual Self-Destruct, the Conscience of the West. So you see, it's not the same Lewin, but it's the same tri-state area that produced Flame Over Africa and Conscience of the West and Jimmy Queerball, which you see with the neurological injury. And what they do is they say we're the pitchfork army. Chomsky sold me to the brilliance in the Black Panther mob out here in Seattle as Jimmy Queerball, the sheltered white, who everybody hates. And to boot, he could have saved John Lennon. I mean, they just stack it on. They throw anything into the broth they can think of. And Chomsky says, "Get out your pitchforks. He's never going to sleep with another Sally." Well, the thing about these pitchfork army is that while they're doing that to me, you wouldn't do that to them, and they do a lot worse. We get these stories. Let's talk for a minute about a story that's only related to people like Donald in the tri-state character wise. You know, maybe that's not fair. I don't know that Donald ever actually raped anybody, but he was sexually violent. I don't know that he never did. That doesn't mean he never did. But down in Texas, down at the border, I'm not getting in favor of seeing them secede from the Union because of stories like this. Although maybe it's abdicating responsibility. I don't want to be associated with it. There's stories of thugs grabbing what they call illegals and raping them. And it's a horrid norm that gets around and probably doesn't get prosecuted the way it should. And that you get all the areas of gray in between. Well, if you do this, I'll let you do that. And that's abnormal. We live in a society that's fundamentally abnormal, where these stories don't surprise us. It's the new Mississippi burning. What's going on with um, children from Latin America? So we don't want to encourage a society that tolerates that sort of thing. We want to be men. We don't want to be professional Republican Congress persons. Professional Republican Congresspersons tolerate that. They all stand with Donald, whether he did it or not. Donald, we don't know who did it. We don't Donald do it. And they let Donald do it if he wants to. So it's not Donald doing it because they let him do it. You see what I'm saying? We don't want to be professional congresspersons. We want to be men. We want to be mature people. Now, I say professional congresspersons, I don't mean everybody. I mean those dang Republicans, those scallywags, and Joe Manchin, the default Republican. Kick them out of the party. What's Biden doing listening to those scallywags? It's time for him to stand up and be president. He tried to deal with them. Nobody's ever going to say he bypassed Congress. Nobody ever did more to reach out to his fellow men. He would have taken Mitch McConnell, what was it, Woodrow Wilson or something, and left Henry Cabot Lodge behind to sabotage the League of Nations. That's not Joe Biden's style. He took McConnell's word that a Kentucky anti-abortion judge was the best choice and should be given the nod. So don't delay action, Joe. You've been tolerant to these scallywags. It's time for you to stand up and be president of the United States and declare the climate emergency for what it is. Take responsibility for people who are adults in this country who want to see action. You know that America is part of the world, not some gruesome thug who thinks he knows what's best for everyone.